Ow!
The Tribute King by Brandon Hill. Acknowledgements for Keith, Jen, David, and of course Liz for your insight. Special thanks to Kelly Scandizo for her help in the planning and process of my book, Through Thick and Thin. Prologue. Prince Vorin bounded up the 100 steps of the citadel as if there were only 2, barely winded and buoyed with excitement from his news. Laszlo trailed behind, laden with the weight of the 3 satchels that he was holding, each made of thick and tough sand whale skin. "Come on, slowpoke," the prince called down to him. Laszlo, sweating profusely, paused and gazed upwards, bleary-eyed. "Your Highness," his servant and friend wheezed as he trod foot after leaden foot up the staircase, "I don't think your father will appreciate your lack of decorum." "The old man has too much decorum in his diet," Vorin drawled dismissively, and reached out to hoist Laszlo and the bundles he carried the final distance toward the landing. "Now come along." Laszlo kept a generous pace behind while he caught his breath. The guard at the golden entrance door to the throne room at the end of the antechamber saluted and opened the door for the prince. The assembly of supplicants and petitioners moved aside, making a wide path. "Father!" Vorin crossed the distance to the dais of the ornately carved throne, made of a solid block of petrified wood from the Fire Mountains. A petitioner, whose speech he interrupted, slinked away at the sight of him, and out the door through which the prince had entered. Vorin bowed before his father, King Corian, with an uncharacteristic flourish, hearing Laszlo skid to a halt behind him and fall to his knees. The hard thump of the satchels followed as they struck the polished stone floor. "If you please, I've come to announce a great victory." Vorin had expected a reaction. Any reaction at all from his father, the guards, retainers, advisors, or even the assembled courtiers after so grand an announcement. But the throne room was uncharacteristically, eerily silent. The king had not even given him leave to rise. Father?" Vorin glanced toward the throne, fighting down the choke of embarrassment with the momentary notion that he had perhaps burst in on some critical discussion. "So that's what became of the heads." The king's rich, sonorous voice pierced the silence like the ram horn at the temple, calling supplicants to devotion. Vorin felt his gaze upon him, those piercing gray eyes that rested beneath dark, bushy eyebrows, and a circlet that held down his luxurious locks of ebony hair, with gold rings fastened to their ends. The prince stole a glance, watching his father slump back, and his red Naga silk cloak framing his gold-fringed black leather tunic. "Bring me those bags, boy," he commanded to Laszlo, who had bowed over as steadily as Vorin and was still huffing and puffing from his arduous journey up the stairs. Laszlo hauled his satchels to the throne's dais to place them at the king's feet, and then backed away, facing the throne as protocol dictated. Vorin, still at a loss to understand what was going on, heard the shuffling of the bag's leather straps, and then whispering between the king and Avon, his chief adviser, who stood beside the throne. "On your feet," the king said, his voice gruff and terse. "Both of you!" Vorin stood upright, his sore back grateful for the reprieve, but his innards churning at the sight of his father's expression, which was as dark and menacing as any look that he was known to give when sentencing criminals. "Tell me, my son, was it you who downed the approaching hovercraft that our tower guards spotted earlier today?" "Yes, father," Vorin said, his voice having lost much of its prepared eagerness. "I was in the West Tower and saw them approaching. It was a small hovercraft with 5 guards and 3 passengers bearing the standards of the Plenchus lands. I took my fast dromedon and, with surprise on my side, wiped out the whole retinue, guards and all. It was surprisingly easy and did not even break a sweat, and it was high noon. How our most hated enemy managed to get this far into the deep desert unspotted, I'll never—" "I invited them." Vorin felt acutely and utterly sick. He also discovered that he had no need to swear. Laszlo had beaten him to it and made a more profane oath than he could have ever devised. When the king spoke again, his voice had lowered in even more threatening octave. "You obviously don't remember the name Rogan Hamer, do you?"
Should I?
Voren found that his voice had become unsteady. A slight crack broke into it, and he swallowed, tasting the faintest hint of bile.
"The correspondence I had been speaking about for the last 3 months!"
the king growled. He slammed his fist upon the throne, upon the last word, and everyone present, Voren included, jumped with a start.
"The correspondence with the man whose very head lies in this satchel?"
He turned toward the steward at his right, and shot a gloved finger towards the middle bag.
"Avon, was the record searched? Was the letter aboard?"
"It was in the safe in the captain's quarters, in a fireproof strongbox."
The gaunt-looking man at the king's right side, bearing the same white robes as Laszlo, produced a scrolled parchment with a waxen seal and presented it to the king. Voren was too far away to see the fine details of the seal, but its distinctive pentagram shape identified it as House Hamer, the ruling family of the Plentus lands in the far north. The fertile and temperate valleys of the desert tribe's enemies were fed by the abundant waters of the polar ice caps that lay beyond the impenetrable Stonewall Mountains.
But even then, the prince's sport left a smoke cloud that could be seen for miles.
The king took the scroll and broke the seal, glanced over its contents, then squeezed his eyes shut before he looked away. An expression that was midway between pain, shame, and fury crossed his bearded face, and he rested his brow in his hand. He tossed the parchment unceremoniously to the ground, and Voren watched as it fluttered miserably to the bottom of the dais. The thick wax of the seal made a tapping sound that seemed to echo in the throne room's dead silence. For nearly a minute he said nothing. "Your Majesty?" the guard at his left side said, concerned.
"Out."
The king's voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible even to Voren. Avon, a puzzled expression on his face, leaned closer to the king.
"Excuse me?"
"Out!"
The king sat bolt upright, causing Avon to stagger back nonplussed. The king made a broad, sweeping gesture to the entire court.
"Everybody out! Now! Guards, tell the assembly in the antechamber to come back tomorrow."
Before Voren could feel even the beginnings of any kind of relief, his father cast a bolt-quick gesture towards him.
"Oh no, my son, not you. You will remain right here. Your servant may leave and be thankful that I don't have him beaten for being an accessory to this fool's mission, but he'll not want to be here for what I have planned."
Voren's terror grew exponentially as one by one the throne room's assembly filed away.
"Gods be with you,"
was all that Laszlo could murmur before beating a hasty retreat. Soon there were none left but himself and his father. The door latch fell into place, the sound echoing with the finality of a death's knell.
3 months' worth of negotiation.
The king's words came out hard and cold through a face composed of clenched teeth, narrowed eyes, and skin that glowed a new menacing shade of red.
2 of those 3 months spent just getting the damn royal court and House Hamer to even agree to this peace effort. And you, in the time it takes to void your bowels, made it all for nothing!
"Father, it's—"
Voren's mind floundered for a proper word to use.
"Unfair to blame me. If I had any inkling that was an emissary—"
Voren's excuse seemed to break what was left of the king's patience as he fired upwards from his throne to his full imposing height.
"You have a brain, do you not?" he thundered. "Why the hell would such a small group come out this far, and bearing their standards no less?"
He leaped from his throne and dais with an echoing thud as his feet hit the ground, then crossed the floor with a speed that nearly blinded the prince with paralyzing fear. Before he could step back, his father whipped his arm out and grabbed him violently by his hair. It was all that Voren could do to bite back the reflex to cry out from the agony that fired through his follicles.
"What kind of an idiot did I raise who would be so eager for glory and honor for his tribe that he'd take all leave of his common sense?"
The king's long, narrow nose was nearly against his own, which was flat and broad as his mother's had been.
"Or were you just thirsty for blood? By all the gods, why did they curse me with such a son?" "It was a mistake!"
Voren strained his words through his pain, but there was no mercy to be found in his father's unrelenting grasp.
"A mistake?"
His father shrieked the word in naked fury, then, as if fearing murder, appeared to restrain himself. Still his more level voice resounded with all the scorn of his countenance. "No, boy, no. Disobeying me by leading a night charge against those bandits? That was a mistake.
You knew there were day sleepers, and yet you had us chasing them halfway around the planet. We were lucky the heat got to the survivors before we did. In addition, let's not forget that spectacular embarrassment when you entered the annual Dromedon race, knowing that no one would dare outpace you for fear of execution, and embarrassing me in front of the tribal council for it. That, too, was merely a mistake. And of course, let's not forget all the times I had you fetched from brothels when you should have been with me at court, the king continued. Shall we call those mistakes, too? You had better thank the gods that the girls are not obligated to tell us of when the herbs they eat to make their wombs barren fail to work. Only they know how many bastards you may have sired by them. Perhaps I should go and ask them, eh? Have the priest legitimize the lineage if I find such a child and place him under your incompetent care so you can make even more mistakes? Vorin, cast in teary-eyed pain, tried to reply, but only managed to force a strange choking shriek from his throat. Be thankful I'm not so cruel, the king said. Still, have I not warned you time and time again that I would someday make you regret your idiocy? Father, please! Vorin felt trickles of thick fluid running down his forehead that he was certain was not sweat, and his pain pushed him beyond the point where his pride would have prevented him from begging. Forgive me! It won't happen again! Oh, I'm absolutely certain it won't. The king tossed him to the ground with the same careless ease with which he threw down the parchment. His tone was as menacing as his form, shrouded demon-like in his red cloak. What's done is done with the emissaries. At least you were taught well enough to make it look like an accident. The wreckage was too far from the Plentius lands for anyone to know. House Hamer will most likely chalk the disappearance up to some unfortunate mishap. The hovercraft had run into a megarachna or a pack of sand tigers or raiders, who knows? He shook his hands as if he had just handled something vile, and Vorin, vision still blurred with tears from his throbbing scalp, saw the red of blood droplets splatter to the floor. Sand at night, sand at day, the desert swallows up its prey, the king recited, all neat and tidy. But with you, my very foolish son, I have been more than generous with my warnings. The king stalked over to the long marble table beside the buttressed windows at the throne room's far end, the place where the royal council held their meetings. He then removed a sheet of parchment and pen from the supply at the table's center. Now is the time for the teaching of lessons. He sat down in the chair reserved for his secretary and set pen to paper. Vorin, gingerly grasping his reeling head, struggled to his feet and staggered drunkenly over to the table. He steadied himself against its marble surface just as his father finished writing. "Father, what are you doing?" he asked as the king rolled up the parchment, dripped a few drops of the red wax from the nearby candle onto it, and stamped it with his signet. Ignoring his son's question, he rang the servant bell. A young boy with the same white robes as Avon and Laszlo entered through the nearby door and bowed. The king placed the parchment onto his outstretched hands. "Take this to the Falcon Heights," he instructed the boy. "Inform the falconer to use his fastest bird. It's to be sent to Cisalgnus with all due haste to the hands of the High King." "The Greylands!" Vorin nearly shrieked with a voice that had gained strength along with his limbs. He watched with a new pall of growing fear as the servant disappeared, the pain in his scalp having somewhat subsided with his rising panic. "What would you want with a Naga?" "The time of tribute is in a week," the king said, appearing to be much less angry, a state that only made things seem eerier than before. "And this year, as expected, they've invoked the right of flesh." The connection and subsequent realization that he was about to be numbered among the exiles of that ancient ritual nearly caused Vorin to faint. Staggering, he steadied himself against the table, grasping with new wrenching panic. The flesh tribute! Father, no! Please! You can't possibly... Please, you didn't! "Oh, I most certainly did." The king glanced Vorin's way with narrowed eyes as he placed the pen and candle back into their holders. "I told you that I would one day make you regret your antics. Those were not threats. As king, am I not obligated to make good on my promises?" "But the Naga, the tribute?" Vorin was now panting uncontrollably, refusing to try to hide his hopeless panic. "Father, you may as well have disowned me." "By all rights, I should!" His father pounded on the table's resonant surface as he stood, and Vorin nearly lost his footing for his fear. "Your mother, may the gods rest her soul, would have still been of childbearing age were she still alive today. In addition, I would have, seeing your foolishness, arranged to sire a second heir with her long ago. Nevertheless, I swore to honor her memory by not looking for another companion. Even now, though no one would question my wisdom in stripping you of your rights to the throne, I fear that would be too much. Call me sentimental, but I believe that even a damaged vessel can still be useful. Therefore, I have made a specific request for your exile not to be permanent. 3 years is enough time, I believe, to teach you a little caution and humility. The Naga ought to understand, due to your position, despite your indiscretions. I know that somewhere beneath that foolish, stubborn body that has more muscle than brains, there hides a true future king of Fire Mountain. Perhaps they can teach you what I cannot. But I'll have to wed a Naga, Vorin pleaded. His hopeless terror railed within him with the indignity of it all. And sire Naga babies with her by me, by my royal seed. More is the pity for them, the king's reply dripped with pitiless sarcasm. Hopefully those children won't carry your less than endearing traits. Besides, the Naga will take this as a benefit. They are getting royalty to add to their bloodlines. They will see it as an honor. Father, please, Vorin persisted, despite his dismal awareness of the hopelessness of his situation. Don't you even care? That is exactly why I am doing this. The king's voice softened for the first time since Vorin had arrived with his grisly trophies. However, there was no comfort in that softness. I promised you that you would regret your idiocy. Well, my son, your regret has only just begun. Get your affairs in order, or lose yourself in the whores at the brothel like you normally do. I care not which. However, remember this. You will be leaving with the caravan to Cisalgnus in a week's time, or you will live the rest of your life with neither home nor tribe. The choice is yours.